Hello, and welcome to episode 5 in my how-to series. In this episode, we'll be looking at something we would all love to master: custom decal printing. Using current materials and equipment, we can create reasonable decals for most situations, but there are limitations. I hope to show you some of the techniques I've learned, and try and get the best results from what we have available. Typically, waterslide decals are produced by screen printing. Artwork is created on a computer in layers, each of which represents a different colour. For each colour, a screen is created, and this is used to print the design in sequence onto the decal paper. Water or solvent-based inks are normally used, as they have excellent opacity. White is usually the first layer, with further layers added once the previous one has dried. Here we are printing 10 separate layers, including the varnish layer. This technique is used by most model manufacturers, and is ideal for producing long runs of decals. It does, however, have its drawbacks. Every colour requires its own screen and separate printing operation, so the more colours you specify, the greater the cost. This also means that you can't have shading in your artwork, just solid colours, and that's it. There are a few techniques you can use to get some variation, but I won't go into those here. Being printed through a fine screen can mean that very fine detail can be hard to reproduce. The final varnish layer is printed over the top, defining each individual decal. Here you can see the final decal sheet back from the printers. Each individual aircraft is clearly marked out. The print quality is excellent, with good opacity and no smudging or noticeable bleed. But we want to print our own decals, maybe just for one model, so screen printing is completely uneconomical. Let's see what we need to print our own decals. Well, we will need a computer, but we don't need anything super powerful, as we won't be dealing with anything really complex. Even a standard laptop will do. Next, you'll need a scanner. This will make it a lot easier to scale your decals and get them to fit your model. Again, you don't need anything expensive. Of course, you'll need a printer. This is the most important bit, and there are a few options, but more on that in a minute. Finally, to let your creative juices flow, you're going to need some software. Images on a computer can be created in two ways. Images such as photographs, or those from a scanner, are composed of small squares of colour, known as pixels. These are known as raster images. The more pixels you have per inch, the greater the resolution, and the better the image quality. But the more you enlarge the image, the worse it becomes. We'll come back to raster images later. We need to use software capable of creating vector graphics. These vector graphics are composed of mathematical curves and can be scaled to any size without loss of quality. Here the upper image is a vector and the lower one a raster. The software you need for vector artwork is Specialist, but you can use it to create most of the artwork for decal printing your models, and lots of other things. All of these are vector graphics. Each element, be it text or shape, is defined by its outline and fill. The outline can be specified in any width or colour. We have a few options for vector graphics software. Let's run through them. Adobe Illustrator is the pro choice, but only available on subscription. So unless you're already signed up with other Adobe software, it is rather pricey. Corel Draw is available to buy outright, and you only need a basic student version. I've been using it for over 20 years, and it does everything I need. With more and more software going down the subscription-only route, free software is on the rise. Inkscape seems to be the best of the bunch and will do most of what we need. Certainly give it a try to get started and see how you get on for free. So that we have something to work from as a template, we need to scan in some basic plans. In this case, a Spitfire Mark I in 1/48 scale. We'll have to check and scale them to the correct size for our model. Sometimes, plans printed at a specified scale have been tweaked to fit on the page by the printer, so it's worth checking. Before we get stuck into drawing some lovely decals, we do need to make sure what colour space we're using. This is important. How we define our colours is crucial to how they will be printed. Anything for the screen or web should be specified in RGB, but we want to output our images with a printer, which will use CMYK. If we start defining colours for printing using RGB, we'll get some wildly inaccurate colours, as you'll see later. Here you can see my ranges of colour swatches for aircraft and tanks. This helps me make the right colour choices. I can then select the best match using my Pantone colour fan and specify that in my software. I could use a CMYK chart and specify that way too. There are links in the description to some good standard colour charts. Alternatively, you can go online and find the CMYK values directly. epaint.co.uk supply great colour charts and specify most RAF and British Army colours. Here you can see the CMYK values for RAF Sky and Medium Sea Grey. This is exactly what we need. Now we can start designing the decals in our software. The learning curve isn't too steep, but eventually you should end up with something like this. Sometimes colours can look wrong on the screen, but that's because your screen probably isn't calibrated, and the computer is displaying a CMYK colour in RGB, and things are going to go wonky in translation. If in doubt, do a printout of the colours on some photo paper and adjust them accordingly. Now for the tricky bit, printers and printing. Whenever decal printers are mentioned, one brand always comes up: Alps. These used a ribbon cartridge and were capable of not only printing the standard CMYK colours, but also white, metallics and a varnish layer. Unfortunately, they're no longer manufactured and only reconditioned machines are available at a premium. And as Alps stopped making cartridges back in 2015, keeping one going is going to be difficult. To fill the gap in the market, Oki now produce a laser printer, which does print in white. This printer and its variety of specialist papers mean it can be also used to print artwork for t-shirts, mugs and other applications, as well as decals. On the downside, it is rather expensive, and creating decals can require an additional heat press. But what about regular laser printers? Yes, you can go for a colour laser printer, but make sure you go for a high resolution one, otherwise your decals will look grainy. These printers are unable to print white and use specialist decal paper for laser printers. This paper comes coated with a water-soluble glue, with a clear or white plastic carrier film on the top. The design is then simply printed straight onto the paper, and it's good to go. The only downside is the plastic film can be fairly stiff from some manufacturers, which means getting the decal to conform to complex curves can be difficult. For many, the best option is the standard domestic inkjet printer. These are reliable, reasonably priced, and output very high quality prints. The main downside is the cost of the ink cartridges. If you're buying a new printer, I recommend you look for one with a continuous ink supply system, which will allow you to top up the inks as necessary from bottles. Alternatively, look for replacement cartridges which are refillable. Most inkjet printers have just the 4 CMYK cartridges, but some pro-quality printers can have up to 9. These additional cartridges are for lighter shades of cyan, magenta and black, and are used to better recreate the paler colours. The cartridges here are refillable. You can see the little tags for the filler bungs. Inkjet paper comes with a layer of water-soluble glue onto which the decal is printed, and then varnished by hand with a spray can. White inkjet papers come with an additional layer of white, onto which the design is printed and varnished. I'm going to be making some decals for my 1:48 scale Spitfire Mark I. This is the artwork in Coral Draw on an A6 sheet. It's worth trying to fill the sheet, as you may get rejects, and at least this way you'll get some spares. A6 is the smallest most printers will work with, so if you only use part of the sheet, the rest is scrap. Decal paper comes in A4 sheets and is easily cut down to size. Here's a sheet of clear and a sheet of white decal paper for inkjet printers. This is what I'll be using. There's a link in the description. You can just see the difference, but it's best to store them in separately labelled packets. When printing the decals, I find it best to select glossy paper and maximum quality in the printer software. You can adjust the settings to output more ink, but I found reliably drying the ink difficult. Always go for the highest quality setting, as it gives you the best resolution, and the only downside is it takes a little longer to print. And here it comes. Let's take a look at the quality of our printing. It looks pretty good to me. The colours are accurate, the definition is good, and there are no streaks or smudges. Now we have to give them a coat of varnish. I've tried a few, but found this works best for me. It's actually for cars, but sprays well, dries quickly, and doesn't crack and stays flexible. Let's spray some onto our decals. I found taping them onto a sheet of paper stops them flying across the workbench. Don't use newspaper, as the spray can act as a solvent, melting the newsprint and getting it onto the decals. A light coat works well. As soon as everything is even and shiny, you've done enough. Now you just have to let them dry. We now have one A6 decal, so we'll need to cut it up individually before we start our test. For our test, I've prepared a sheet and divided it up into 4 finishes: white primer, aluminium, red oxide primer, and matte black, all from a rattle can. This will represent the most common tones of finished models that we try and add decals to. Before we start trying to apply some decals, we need to briefly discuss silvering. This is when air is trapped between the surface of the model and the decal. It's often caused by models with an uneven surface or thick, inflexible decals, but there is a solution. If you apply a layer of gloss varnish to the surface of your model and leave it to dry thoroughly, it'll give you a smooth surface, reducing trapped air and silvering. You may have heard mentioned Johnson's Clear, also known as Future. This has been the go-to gloss varnish product for many years. It's a hard-wearing, clear, water-soluble varnish, which is easy to apply. After recent rebranding, it's currently sold as Pledge Revive It. If you want to get some, there's a link in the description. Another method to reduce silvering is using Microsol and Microset. Microset is applied prior to the decal and provides adhesion, while Microsol softens the decal and helps it conform to the surface. These are an essential part of any model maker's toolkit. Okay, let's finally lay down some decals. They've been cut out of the A6 sheet and dipped in cold water for a few seconds before being taken out and allowed to release from their backing paper. We'll start with the white. I've already applied a coat of Revive It to the 4 colours, and I'm just going to apply the decals without any fuss. These inkjet decals are very thin, being just the thickness of the clear varnish, and look great on the white background. Now let's try the same decals on the other colours. Here we go on the silver. Well, you can still see it, but the pale colours are disappearing, and there's no white on the roundel. Onto the red area. This is even worse. The only acceptable colours are the blue and the black. You can't even see the yellow. For the sake of completeness, we'll try the black as well. It's great if you want to go for full stealth mode, but not a lot else. And this is where most decal videos end, but not on this channel. We're going to come up with a couple of solutions to the 2 main problems of DIY decals: white and opacity. Now, you could just print out the decals on white decal paper and carefully cut them out and apply them that way. It does work to a degree, but as you're cutting the decal, you'll see the white layer around the edges when you apply it onto your model. One solution to this problem is to print the decals faintly in outline, under size, and on white decal paper. You will then need to cut them out individually with a sharp knife and apply these white decals to the model. It can be difficult to accurately align them on the model, as they're now all individual decals. These are by no means perfect, but they are a step in the right direction. Once the white layer has dried, we can cut out the previous coloured decals printed on clear decal paper and apply them over the top. This method works fairly well on pale backgrounds and is best on decals that are easily cut out. Roundels work well, but lettering's more difficult. The end result isn't too bad. Certainly with more care, you could get a better result. Despite being 2 layers of decals, the only additional depth is 1 layer of varnish, so this can be quite an acceptable solution. And here they are on the finished model. But what if we have lots of fiddly text to cut round? That would be a nightmare. There is a solution. I'm going to show you how we can cleanly apply the markings onto the red background, and indeed any coloured background. First of all, we need to find out exactly what colour our background is. I'm using a Pantone chart, but you can use any chart that your software recognises, as long as it's not RGB. CMYK charts are available, and that'll be fine. Once we're in the ballpark, it's a good idea to print out a range of possible colours to check against. I find small sheets of inkjet photo paper provide a good cheap result. Once you've chosen your colour, use it as a background to your decal design, leaving a generous amount of space around it and print it out on white decal paper. After spraying the decal, apply it as normal and you should have a crisp, clear decal with good colours and white. Here you can see the colour match isn't quite right, but with a bit more tinkering, I should be able to get it a lot closer. The only downside is the white edges of the decal may be visible and will need retouching at some stage. Now let's look at some decals using raster images. Here the SV logo and the 99 image are printed on white decal paper and will be cut out along the lines shown. The 99 images are at 420 dpi and have come out well, even though they're RGB, which does make the colours pretty wild. They go on really well, and being on white decal paper, they've lost no saturation. Even the little black and yellow decal looks good. So far we've only looked at flat decals, but what about decals for curved surfaces? How do we design those? Well, there is a way. This is a fuselage for a 1:48 scale Hawker Typhoon, and I want to make some invasion stripes for it. I've already marked out where they should go on the fuselage, but we need a few things before we get started. Some clear sticky back plastic, some sharp scissors, an accurate measuring stick, a pen to write on the plastic, a knife with a fresh sharp blade, and some paper. We begin by roughly cutting down the plastic and sticking it where we want the decal on the model. You could certainly use sellotape instead, which is great for smaller decals. Next we need to measure and mark out accurately the shape of the decal. I'm making one decal for each side of the fuselage, so I'm marking the centre lines for the top and the bottom. Now, using a sharp blade, I carefully cut out the decal and remove the excess sticky back plastic. Then I carefully unpeel the new decal template, taking care not to stretch or distort it. This is then stuck onto a sheet of paper and marked so I know which way up it goes. The ink around the edges helps to make it stand out for the next stage. I can then scan it into the computer and trace it off in my design software, using it to recreate the stripes and other markings. I extend the top and bottom edges of the stripes to give me a bit of an overlap with the decal on the other side, so I don't end up with a gap at the join. It's always worth printing out these decals on some plain paper as a test before committing to decal paper. I think they'll work out fine. You can see for yourself on the finished model. In this case they were screen printed, but the wraparound technique is exactly the same for DIY decals. Here are a few other decals I've printed off on my inkjet in the meantime. Where the colours look a bit too vivid, they were specified in RGB, as you can see from the green on the Spitfire profile. It looked great on a screen at the time. The colour test strips are printed one strip on clear decal paper, the other on white, so you can see what works and what doesn't. The decals on the red and the black were printed on white decal paper, and you can see the slight colour mismatch, as well as the white decal paper edges in some cases. I hope you found this episode in my how-to series interesting. If you did, hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and make sure you click on the bell icon so you get notified when my next video goes live. Don't forget to check out some of my other projects on my channel to discover more model making techniques. If you have any questions about issues raised in this series, just leave them in the comments and I'll get back to you. Thanks for watching.